You know what, guys? I'm not happy today. In fact, I'm grumpy, because today is Friday, and I hate Fridays. Thankfully, so does Garfield. Garfield is that lovable cat born and raised in the old funny section, who somehow made his way into cartoons, film adaptations, and highly successful game franchise. But, for the best of Garfield, everyone knows you have to start at the beginning, the strips. Here are the top 10 Garfield comic strips. The 10th. A classic and very funny motif in the Garfield is always the sleeping. The Garfield is a sleepy cat, and he is always sleeping. It does not take the reader long to find out this, just by reading. But when it comes to the sleeping gag, it doesn't get better than October 26, 1981. One of the great things about this strip is that it takes no explanation. Here, the Garfield sleeps without interruption. The reader is not only surprised by the clever subversion of comic expectations, but is brought an inner sense of peace, as is customary for Jim Davis to do in his comic strips. The 8th. Jim Davis has never been one to shy away from biting and insightful literary allusions. In the comic 211, another classic and very funny aspect in the Garfield comic, his fatness comes to light. Garfield has always dealt with being fat, an unchanging weight Garfield must carry with him at all times. Concerned with his body image, Garfield seeks refuge in the comfort of laziness, but in his time of need, even that betrays him, much like the character of Bruno in the Shakespeare classic called Hamlet. This is what the line "A2 chair" refers to. It is the English translation, "And you, chair?" The 7th. 114. The 6th. In the Garfield comics, Garfield not only amuses and is very funny, but often baffles the reader. This comic strip, titled 88, is significant not only for making the list of World's Most Baffling Garfield Strips, but for introducing the Odie character for the first time in his first comic strip, the most baffling character in the comic strip. What are Odie's motives, intentions, aspirations, wishes, ambitions, goals, objectives? I don't know, and I doubt that I ever will. Furthermore, what is he? John is a human, and Garfield is a cat. Odie isn't a cat or a human, and if he is not a cat or a human, then what is he? This is a question that haunted me as a child and still does now that I'm older. At the beginning of the strip, John wonders how this strange mustache man from the countryside only has a small suitcase, and at the end, Garfield is in distress in the corner thinking, "Lawsy, lawsy, lawsy," and yet, much like my confusion over Odie, John's bafflement is never answered. Where does this mustache man keep all of the clothes for his body, his toothbrushes? Thanks to Odie, we may never know. The 5th. If you are anyone who is anyone nowadays, sexually harassing women is the hot new trend. John Arbuckle, the funny and always ahead of the curve human master of Garfield, has been doing this since the comic titled 10-6, 60 years before Me Too swept the Hollywood hills. Despite receiving clear rejection from Garfield's lady doctor, John forces not only a date but an unwanted and invasive display of affection onto the doctor, causing her to stop tending to the care and well-being of the cat Garfield, as well as going temporarily brain dead. Garfield is unfazed, and bemusedly reduces John's behavior to a moniker, suggesting that this is common practice for John. This is, of course, very funny, and a prime example of the relatable humor found in many Garfield comic strips. The 1st. This comic, titled 629, is perhaps the funniest comic strip of all time. In fact, it requires almost no explanation. In the first panel, we see Garfield walking with a large grin. He is confident and pleased with his place in the world. In the background, Jim Davis draws a dirt pathway, green sloping grass hills, and purple trees on a blue-violet sky. In the next panel, the Garfield has walked further and now sees a sign reading "Beware the dog," a common sight. Next panel, Garfield sees another sign, this time reading, "Seriously, this dog is bad news." This is unusual, as normally the first sign would have sufficed. Clearly, we are in for a unique experience. In the next panel, the new sign reads, all right, I don't have a dog." This directly contradicts the first two signs, and Garfield is visibly disappointed, losing his winning smile. In the next panel, the new sign explains this contradiction, reading, "I wanted a dog, but no, too stinky, Mother said," establishing that there's no dog to beware of, because the author of the sign's mother thinks they stink. Garfield's usual relaxed eyes have widened to a wide surprise. This is unusual. In the next panel, the new sign reads, in a much more frantic font, "Well, I'll show Mother, I'll show you all," suggesting that the author has taken action given this clear lack of a guard dog. There are more rocks on the ground than usual. In the next and final panel, we get the punchline, where the sign reads, "Beware of the man in the dog suit." Rather than buy a dog, the author, now identified as a man, has resorted to buying a dog suit to ward off intruders. This leaves Garfield speechless, as he stands still now, staring at the reader, and is a very fitting punchline for a very funny comic. The third. Many people know about this famous pipe strip, but very few people know about the aftermath. In this comic, the second. This strip is notable for not being funny, even a little bit, despite having a cat smoking the pipe of John, which is objectively very funny. However, in recent years it has received a resurgence of praise due to its philosophical and literary merit. While I could get into that now, you really are better just off this watching long lecture on the topic. The first Garfield comic ever made might be really bad, but it was the first one, so here it is in first place. Alright, Jonah, I'm done with this fucking bit.